Hello again. So today we're going to talk about a topic that has been heavily discussed since its creation back in the Great Depression, and it's still heavily discussed now. Um, and that is the minimum wage. So let's talk about it. So the minimum wage was introduced back in the 1930s during the Great Depression and has been continuously the topic of policy since by both, the politicians and constituents and voters and just everybody, right? But when we talk about it now, they always talk about how there hasn't been a meaningful wage increase since the 60s. So let me explain why they always go back to that. It's because back in the 60s, we were still tied to gold. We were on the gold standard. Since the 70s, early 70s, mind you, we've been off the gold standard. And so there's a reason why minimum wage, they say there hasn't been a meaningful increase. It's not that there haven't been meaningful increases. It's simply that it gets eroded by inflation. So what do I mean by this? Let me go ahead and give you an example. So right now, the minimum wage is 7.25 an hour. So $7.25 an hour. They want to increase it to $15 per hour. Okay. Now that is a huge increase. That is dramatic. That is probably the biggest increase in minimum wage ever. You're doubling it basically. So that is a big jump. Now, what happens though, because we're not on the gold standard, we don't have inflation restrictions, we can inflate prices as much as we want because we are no longer restricted by the value of gold or the quantity of gold. So what happens is when you increase that minimum wage, okay, so it goes from $7.25 to $15 an hour, okay, and those companies are not going to eat the cost. They're just going to simply pass it on to the consumer, which is what they always do. So when those prices increase, the cost of goods and services then increase as well. This is why since the 70s, basically since the 60s, we haven't had a meaningful increase in wages. It's because it slowly gets eroded away by inflation. And then, of course, inflation doesn't stop. Inflation continuously goes every year. It increases. And so, but minimum wage doesn't increase every year. And so it just continues to get eroded away until the point it just gets demolished. And then we increase it again and inflation just keeps going up and again. It's just this vicious cycle, right? So this is where the $15 an hour minimum wage, they're saying, okay, if we push it up really high, then it should take, a long time for inflation to come up and to surpass it, but it won't because the companies are not going to eat that cost. They're just going to pass it on to the consumers. And so it's just going to get accelerated. Now, right now, there are other variables that are going to accelerate this even faster. So one of those variables would be the cost of oil. So I told you a few weeks ago, OPEC came out and they said, hey, we're curbing the supply of oil because they want to buoy up the price per barrel because, their economies are based on oil, and the higher the price of oil, the better it is for their economy. So naturally, they would like to see it higher. So they're trying to push that up. Well, of course, oil is then used to make gas, and then gas is used to transport goods and services. So if there's a price increase in oil, there's going to be a price increase in gas, which those transportation costs are then again passed on to the consumer. So inflation or the increase in prices is then being compounded. So again, it just you increase the price of wages, inflation erodes that away. And these variables are going to compound that. On top of that, there is another danger that is not being really discussed. When you're talking about minimum wage increases in the past, they have been nominal. They've been slowly pushed up. But this is dramatic. And what's going to happen is that it is going to put a lot of strain on small businesses. And this is a huge problem, especially right now, because we are, with the pandemic and all these other variables that we've had in 2020 because it was a horrible year, small businesses are struggling. They are really hurting. And putting this extra pressure on them, it's going to crush them, basically. I mean, they can't afford it. And it's going to make it much harder for people to open small businesses or to keep the businesses that they have going. And this is a big problem for the US economy because, again, small businesses are the largest employers in the US. And if we start, having small business numbers decreasing, we're going to have higher and higher unemployment. This is not good for the US economy. Now, there is a silver lining to all of this. Okay, when we inflate prices, that usually means that the US dollar is weak. Okay, and that can be a benefit right now because if Congress and the White House administration, and this is a big if, because I don't ever have faith in Congress. They're just, I don't care which side of the aisle, they're just ridiculous. But if they can be smart and if they can negotiate really good trade deals, this can be a benefit for the US and it can help our economy. Now, this is, again, it's a big if. They have to be smart about this because what happens is when the US dollar is weak, now our goods and services are cheap to export, to send to other countries. They buy our goods and services and we send them out. Their money comes in and our goods and services go out. That can make our country richer, having more of their money coming in, right? Just like any store that sells goods and services, the more money that comes into them, the better they're off. So it can make us competitive in exporting our goods and services across the globe. But it can only do that if the trade deals are done correctly to our advantage. And this is where I say it's a big if, and I don't know that this is actually going to happen. If it does, even with the higher increase in prices, we can still have our economy moving forward in a good pace and still help to create jobs, because if we export more, that requires more manufacturing of our goods and services to send out to send outside of the US. So this can be a good thing if it's done correctly. So hopefully that gives you guys a little insight about the $15 minimum, $15 an hour minimum wage. As always, if you guys have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section below and hit that subscribe button, and I will talk with you later.